In this episode of What's the Story, Old Glory, it's debate night, this time between the vice presidential candidates JD Vance and Tim Walls.
Welcome to our special Vice President Debate edition of What's the Story, Old Glory. My name's Todd Muller in Tauranga, and as always, from Oamaru, how are you, Elizabeth?
I'm great. I'm very excited, I have to say. I woke up this morning and I was amped because I can't wait for this debate.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. The two vice presidents. I guess it does impact the wider race, doesn't it? The two vice presidents having a chat, particularly in a race where there's only one debate.
Yeah, and I guess in such a close race it might, but in a lot of states, early voting's already started. A lot of people will have already made up their minds. There's commentators saying how important it is, but then I heard another commentator saying, how many vice presidential debates do you remember occurring in the past? They quite possibly don't matter. I guess some people might be swayed by the thought of, okay, well, if Trump or Harris become president and have to stand down or die in office or whatever, this person would then become the president. But I don't know how many people actually think about it that deeply.
Yes, I don't think many people do. Look, the only vice presidential debate that I can ever recall is the famous one, for me at least, in 1988, when the Democratic nominee, Senator Lloyd Bentsen, was up against Dan Quayle. And Dan Quayle was trying to position himself as essentially the next JFK of the Republican Party. And he was doing okay at it, but was sort of flailing a little bit. And then it went to Lloyd Bentsen to reply, and he just looked at him and he said, "Senator, I knew Jack Kennedy. Senator, I worked with Jack Kennedy. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy." And the place
that's fantastic.
And just the way he did it, and it was clearly off the cuff because it was a bit of a unexpected comparison from a Republican vice president to a former Democratic president, but he just absolutely slaughtered him. But you're right, that's the only one I can remember in, 30 years roughly. So, yeah.
Yeah, so this debate is being held in New York City, maybe quite appropriately in the suburb of Hell's Kitchen. This one is being hosted by CBS. The previous two presidential debates, firstly between Trump and Biden and then Trump and Harris, were hosted respectively by CNN and ABC. Similarly to the previous two debates, there is no audience. But this time, what is different is that the mics will be on the whole time. So they will be trying to speak over each other, I expect, trying to interject. So that was quite different to what happened with the two presidential debates. However, the moderators will be able to mute the candidates if they so desire. They'll have the discretion to be able to do that. And they have made clear that there is going to be no moderator fact-checking in this debate. So that is quite different from what happened in the previous debate between Trump and Harris, when they were essentially fact-checking Trump in particular live as the debate unfolded.
That's fascinating. What's your expectation, Elizabeth? If you were sitting here as we are about to kick off, how do you think the debate's going to unfold? Are we going to see another moment that can compete with Donald Trump's "they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs"? We're going to see something like that, or is this going to be a bit more serious?
Well, typically, vice presidential debates are more serious than the presidential debates because they're not so much about the personality on the ticket. So the discussion and the points that are being made in the debates tend to be a bit more serious. They tend to be a bit more policy focused, going into some more detail around the policy positions of the various campaigns. But this is Tim Walls and JD Vance. I mean, all bets are off for me. I think we are going to see quite a lot of barb trading. I think they're going to be trying to pull some one-liners on each other. An interesting description I read this morning about Tim Walz in particular is that his way of talking to people has been coined Minnesota nice, which pre-existed Walz, of course, but it's about being unfailingly nice and unfailingly polite. But then those seemingly nice comments are actually passively aggressively harsh in tone. So think about his comment about, hey, look, I can buy donuts, or the joke he made about Vance and couches, does it in a way that it might not be apparent to everyone listening the joke that he's trying to make, but for the person that's at the receiving end of it, it can be pretty harsh. And so this is apparently quite common in the state, and so he will be seeking to use that, whether deliberately or subconsciously, I expect. Vance is likely to be a better debater, though. He has got the experience in his career. He's quite a good orator, and he's very intelligent. So although Walz continually paints Vance as being weird, the general sort of feeling is that he will do better in the debate format than Walz would do. Who's better at the sort of hustings campaign speech format?
Yeah, great summary. I think it's going to be Vance on points. There won't be any knockout. I think they're going to talk over each other. I think it's going to get messy, and I think potentially quite nasty. And at the end of it, we'll probably turn America off more than create a particular momentum for one side. So that's my prediction, which I know
Yeah.
sounds glass half empty, but that's what I think.
Interestingly, some analysis has shown that Harris is losing ground with male voters, particularly younger male voters. So I think we've talked about it before. Walz will be trying to do his best to reel them back in as a voting bloc. On CNN just now, as I was watching it, one of the Democratic strategist commentators was repeatedly referring to Walz not as Governor Walz, but as Coach Walz. So as we've talked about before, he was a football coach, a high school teacher. So that's the sort of the part of himself that he's going to be trying to play off, I think, to get those young male voters supporting him rather than Vance, who is a young man.
Yeah, and it's October the 2nd, and we have chatted already on previous podcasts around what is going to be the October surprise. 2 days in, and between the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and, of course, the Middle East unfolding tragedy, really, of the Israeli attack on Lebanon, and of course the Iranian response overnight, and the sense that that too will initiate further responses from both sides. I mean, already we've got two issues which could be October surprises, and we're sort of 2 days in. So no doubt both those issues will come up tonight.
Yeah, I mean, some of the news coverage of the debate, even as we're watching it live, is being interrupted by updates from what's happening with American and Israeli defense forces intercepting Iranian missiles. So there could be big things happening during the debate that actually interrupt it. Wouldn't surprise me. And I think there aren't many countries in the world that have alcohol drinking games as part of their culture. But New Zealand and the United States are two such countries. And the New York Times has helpfully provided on their website a vice presidential debate drinking game. And so the idea is that whenever candidates say a certain thing, you have to drink. So, for instance, there's different amounts of alcohol and water, drink responsibly, that have to be consumed when they say different things. For instance, you drink water at every mention of unity, bipartisanship, or coming together. You have a sip of your drink if Vance accuses the moderators or the media of being biased. When Walz tries to tie the Trump campaign to Project 2025, every time Walz calls Vance or Trump weird. Take a shot if Vance warns about World War III. If Vance accuses Walz of stolen valor. When Walz jokes about couches in reference to Vance, and if either candidate mentions Springfield, Ohio, and it goes on. And then finish all your liquor in the cabinet if Walz and Vance start brawling on the floor. So go to the NewYorkTimes.com if you want to find the drinking game. It's a bit early in the day here in New Zealand, but
It
people
is.
might be doing it in the States.
It is. I'd have to say, perhaps the cupboard's not going to be completely drunken through. I doubt if they'll get to physical brawling.
We are now 1.5 minutes away from the debate beginning, so let's sit back, relax, or not relax, depending on how you feel about these debates, I suppose, and enjoy the show. So we're 2 questions in. The first one was about the immediate issues to do with what's happening in the Middle East and whether America should launch a preemptive strike against Iran in retaliation to the strikes on Israel. And the second was about climate change. Now, personally, I feel like aside putting the points that they've made aside, the way they are delivering what they're trying to say, I would think that Vance is doing much, much better than Walls. Walls was the first to answer a question. There were lots of ums and lots of ahs, and I'm not criticising because I know I do that too. But, you know, this is a vice presidential debate. So I just feel like Vance is delivering himself better. He's very articulate. He's making his points very well. And I really like his tie.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to argue with that. But I'm sort of the king of ums and ahs. I shouldn't pass judgment on anybody who ums and ahs. But you're quite right. JD Vance looks far more polished, comes across incredibly relaxed. When he's asked pointed questions by the moderator or Governor Walz is trying to hit him on something that Trump has said in the past, he doesn't look at all flustered and very, very competently, maneuvers the conversation back to what his key points were. We did think that he would be very good as a debater, but this is the first time I've actually sat and listened to him in a debate forum. I thought his speech at the Republican National Convention was average, to be honest. It didn't really grab me. This is far more impressive. He is putting aside, as you say, the content of the policy. I think in terms of the vibe of the thing, he's very, very comfortably. What's your sense? Is there anything particularly stark or striking about the content, Elizabeth, when you listen to the two perspectives?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. I've written down a couple of quotes that Vance said when he was talking about the Israel-Iran situation. He used the phrase peace through strength, which is very sort of harks back to the days of old of Republican foreign policy that we've talked about before, which is quite, I don't know if Donald Trump has ever used that phrase himself, but he slipped it in there very well. And then he also said that America has the cleanest economy in the entire world, which I found quite extraordinary, and just completely. It was interesting that Walz didn't question him on that at all. But then I guess if he had, you're implying that it doesn't have a clean economy, so that probably wouldn't go down well with his voter base. So I don't think either of them has said anything alarming as yet. They're both being very polite to each other, and there's been minimal interruptions.
Yeah, I thought the peace through strength could have been delivered by Ronald Reagan. And to exactly your point, is not something that is sort of linked to Trump's style. And
Ronald Reagan was the person that popped into my mind as soon as he said that.
Yeah, which is interesting. And I think that certainly works for Vance. I actually quite liked his response to the question when he finally got there. I mean, as you say, he spent most of his time introducing himself, which was supposedly not allowed, but he got away with it. When he just basically says, well, Israel's got to do what they need to do to defend themselves, and we've got to stand shoulder to shoulder. I thought that was very effective. I noticed that apart from the ums and ahs that you talk about with Walz, he is a little bit caught here, and Vance is pushing him this way, into defending the Biden-Harris term, and which I think is less able to do. I mean, he wasn't part of the term. He's having to sort of school himself around the various ins and outs of what Biden and Harris have actually done or not done over the last 3.5 years. So he's a little bit defensive in that space. And in order to get out of that, he then goes on the attack and tries to link Vance to some statement that is incredulous that Trump has made before. I think quite an effective strategy from his perspective, but as we touched, every time he does that, Vance pivots effectively and sort of quickly returns back to the points that he wanted to make. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes, but I think Vance will keep pushing to link Walz to the Biden-Harris 3.5 years. And I'd be interested to see whether you'll be able to squirm out of that, Walz. I think he's going to struggle.
Yeah, he even, had a Freudian slip himself and referred to it as the Harris administration. So I don't know if he's going to do that again. But he's almost slightly Biden-esque in the way Walz is speaking. He's sort of disjointed and it's a bit of this is what Republicans continually accuse Harris of, as having a bit of a word salad. He's got sort of phrases that he's trying to join together that don't necessarily, but he's not weaving a consistent narrative through it, whereas Vance is doing that quite effectively, I think.
Yeah, that's very well said. Right, into section number 2. So we've just had a section on immigration, which of course is a massively hot button issue in America, and we've talked about it in a number of our podcasts with our guests from over there. And one of the big sort of issues that we expected to come up was the whole issue around the Haitians in Springfield and Ohio, and what that meant in terms of the immigration pressures in that city, and how the Haitians who are there legally have been demonized by Trump and JD Vance over the last few weeks. I actually thought it was pretty much split. I thought JD Vance got his messages talking to his base around the impact on that community of such a permissive border strategy of Biden and Harris. And I thought that Walz did pretty effectively returning fire and reminding everyone that there was a bill in the House that had support that would have fundamentally strengthened the agency's capacity to respond to illegal immigration, but the Republicans vetoed it. And I thought they both got their points off pretty well, and both sides of the argument will be pleased to have heard their perspective echoed.
Yeah, interesting point for me is that the issue around the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, was raised by Walz. It wasn't raised by Vance. And I think that Walz was trying to bait him into saying something stupid like Trump did about they're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs and they're eating the geese or whatever it is. But Vance didn't take the bait. And he had that information about how the Haitian immigrants legally came to be living in Springfield, Ohio. He obviously knew that that's what he needed to say, and he was going to say it regardless of what the moderators did. And so I think he's masterfully, if I'm honest, contrasted himself to the way Trump took the bait in the debate against Harris, but Vance is not doing the same thing. So he's obviously been coached really well on not to say some of the weirder things that he's said in the past. Whether he can keep that up for the next hour or so remains to be seen.
Agreed. And the more that I see him perform like you've just outlined, the more it jumps to my mind that if he doesn't get it across the line with Trump in a month's time, he's going to be very formidable in 4 years. Because he is quite an impressive political figure, regardless of your view of his political ideology. He's very, very smooth.
Yeah, and a lot of people, this, like you say, if there are a lot of people tuning in, this will be the first time they've really seen him like this in action, apart from those campaign speeches that he's made. He rose to prominence with the publication of his memoir, and he's a friend of tech giants like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and people like that. But yeah, seeing him like this, it's a different kind of character than the one that is often portrayed in the media when you don't hear him speak himself. And obviously he's not good at, off the cuff kind of meetings with people on the ground when he's trying to order donuts or what have you. But this is clearly where he excels.
Yes, well said. So we've just had a section on the economy, and again, it was reasonably even, although JD Vance is demonstrating how effective he is as a debater. I thought the way he finished this segment, essentially saying to Walls, look, I feel your pain. You're in a tough position here. You're trying to play whack-a-mole with the fact that actually a lot of the metrics, economic metrics, were really good under Trump's administration, certainly pre-COVID, and they aren't anywhere near as good now. And you're trying to critique a record that was actually quite strong economically, and then pretend that the Biden-Harris record is stronger than it actually is. I thought he did that pretty effectively. What's your sense, Elizabeth? They seem to be very much reflecting rehearsing their arguments. I'm sure they'll play well with each of the bases. But if you were a struggling truck driver, as was referenced, I think, by Walls, listening to that, who do you think's the most compelling at the moment?
I'm not actually sure on that argument, because it seemed like they were both pretty light on specifics as to how they were actually going to fix things. Like, they both spent a lot of time pointing out problems that everyday Americans were feeling, whether that's the nurses and teachers that Walls referred to, or the, people going into medical debt, like Vance's grandmother that he referenced. But yeah, not a lot of in-depth information about exactly how they were going to make that better. They both had a couple of interesting zingers in there. Walls talked about Trump getting lots of people down to Mar-a-Lago and saying, you're rich as hell, here's a tax cut. And Vance talked about people advising the government who have PhDs but no common sense, and I'm trying not to be personally offended by that as a PhD student. But it was interesting, Vance's comments. It kind of sounded like he was saying that he was against free trade, which sounds pretty leftist in many ways, very different from what a Republican would normally say. And then interestingly, he said at the end, and you're not going to be able to stop this by listening to experts. So basically saying, I don't care what the economists say, our plan's a good one.
Yeah, and that you're quite right about the lack of detail. I mean, the first question to Walls was, how are you going to fund your $1.2 trillion increase in government spending? The numbers here just completely eye-watering. Your comment with respect to Vance on trade and it sounding leftist, I think it's just that return to that American first ideology that, we haven't heard, I think, frankly, since the war, since Second World War. There has not been America first, America the isolationist power, that's our future, we just need to trade with ourselves, forget about the rest of the world. And that's sort of the sentiment that we're hearing, this idea that somehow you can retreat back from globalization, bring back all those manufacturing jobs by a signing of an executive order is just completely nonsensical. As it is, by suggesting that a little bit of investment in the middle class will fund a $1.2 trillion increase in government spending. It's let's avoid the detail and go to the sort of sentiment, try to play to the sentiment that middle America's feeling, that life is tough. It's got tougher in the last few years. Which one of you two are going to make life better for me?
Yeah, and then throw in a pretty out there comment about drugs that we're putting in our children's bodies being manufactured in countries that are our enemies. It's playing on some fears, isn't it?
Certainly is. Bearing in mind previously you've said that that's coming from Mexico. That's right up there. But let's move on to the next section.
So I'm sitting here watching this debate with my teenage son, who's providing me some commentary in my ear while we're watching it.
I suspect.
James, would you like to say something that you just So we just heard the moderator ask a very direct question, very specific to Tim Walsh, because he's earlier said that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square crisis happened in 1989, and he didn't answer the question. And what did you say?
So did he go to China or not?
Exactly.
Yeah, very well said. I think we got there in the end, but perhaps not
He
1980.
went there, but I'm sensing he didn't go at the time. So he wasn't at Tiananmen, wasn't in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre, because he's the only sort of reference he made to "I got it wrong" was saying "I've been a knucklehead," which I presume means I got it wrong. I wasn't there at the time.
Yeah, and sometimes I talk too much and get carried away with the rhetoric. It's not an issue, to be honest, I'd heard about. Clearly, it's a very
No.
local issue over there, an example of, essentially trying to call into question his character, that he's not as truthful as perhaps he's given the impression that he is. I thought, firstly, James is on the money. If you've been caught out, you just need to own it and say, yep, I got my date slightly wrong, but, and then pivot onto something else, because frankly, no one cares. But the more you go on about it without answering it, the worse the issue becomes. And I suspect he's about to have a follow-up question, which is going to go worse for him.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
So obviously that was a section where both candidates were tested on statements they've made in the past and the lack of veracity around them, or in the case of JD Vance, the fact that he's done a complete 180 degrees and now doesn't think Trump has the potential to be America's Hitler. What was your feedback on that section, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, we were incredulous about Wells's response and not answered the question really, but Vance did. He did in terms of that he's talked about. Yes, I do think that there were things wrong with the Trump administration. He didn't answer the question that was put to him about would he say the things that Trump needs to hear rather than the things that Trump wants to hear, which was a huge factor in his previous administration, and he generally either fired the people that were honest and provided him with the free and frank advice that public officials are meant to do, or he either fired them or they resigned because they couldn't work under him. So yeah, Vance didn't answer that question, but still he delivered his answer in a better way. And you made a comment before about the split screen, and it's interesting seeing Waltz's face when Vance is answering some of these questions. He's looking a bit like an angry old man, which is what Trump looked like in the last debate, I have to say.
Yes, he is. His sort of resting face is an upside down smile, and that's unfortunate for television, and it's particularly unfortunate when you're being thrashed in a debate.
So we just had the question that we knew was going to come up around abortion rights, access to healthcare for women, fertility treatments, that range of issues. And I guess not surprisingly, I think that Walls won that part of the debate. His responses were very detailed, measured. He talked frequently about women should be able to choose what happens to their own bodies. He talked specifically about instances of women who have either died or have had severe medical trauma and possibly infertility as a result of what states have done or not done in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And so I thought that he was always going to win this issue, and he did. And then he managed to weave in at the end there, talking about how Republicans often talk about being pro-life and supporting families and babies and that sort of thing, which Vance talked about. But he turned that around to talking about policies that actually support families, not just being narrowly focused on the issue of abortion itself. What did you think?
I think that's a very good summary. The thing that absolutely struck me was Vance's willingness to be open about the fact that the Republican Party, the Republican leadership, including himself, hasn't got the messaging right and has lost the trust of many women in America with respect to their abortion position, which was, I thought, quite extraordinary. He didn't in any way step back from the positions that the certainly Trump has taken, which is this is a matter for the states as opposed to the Supreme Court, and that of course is a function of the Supreme Court decision last year around Roe v. Wade. But to me, it was more facilitative and open than I was expecting. I was expecting far more, if I could use these terms, fire and brimstone from the right, but instead he, I thought, attempted to appear more reasonable on the issue. And so I think probably meant that whilst he did lose, in my opinion, Walz was absolutely passionate and very compelling. The fact that Vance was willing to show some vulnerability on it from a political perspective, I think will be a talking point from this debate.
Yeah, I know that some Republicans have sort of tried to dial it back because they've seen some of the consequences of these decisions that are affecting women and families on the ground, and that's probably what Vance is trying to do there. I thought it was interesting that he brought up a close friend of his who had an abortion when she was younger, saying that she felt that she had to because she didn't have the economic means and wherewithal to be able to, raise a child. But he never really said, what he was getting at with that point. Like, I think he actually scored a point for Walz there. Yeah, so my son has rightly just pointed out that he quoted her as saying she was glad she made the decision that she did, and if she had not made that decision, it would have ruined her life. So, like I say, it sounds like he scored a point for Walz there.
Yeah. Secondly, I think James is a very good contributor to this debate and should be in the final of his contributions.
I'll make him a political scientist.
Yes, you will. I think what I say to that is, to me, that's him reinforcing the sense that actually, the Republicans are trying to create the perception that the Republicans aren't fire and brimstone on this, to the extent that the sort of perception has taken hold. And so it was unusual because he was highlighting that one of his best friends, who he loves a lot, has had an abortion and had to because of the economic situation she found herself in. And he sort of just put that out there, as you say. By the way, a very good friend of mine's had an abortion, and I sort of understand why, is not what you would expect Vance to be saying in response to an abortion question. So I think it's all part of this kind of reframing the Republicans on this issue to be, less extreme perhaps than how they have been positioned previously.
Has the Trump-Vance ticket just lost a slew of evangelical voters who are now not going to vote at all? I don't know.
Yeah, good question. I'm tempted to think they just have no choice. They can't go anywhere else. So the question is, will it demotivate them from turning up to vote?
Yeah. So we've just had the section on protecting US democracy. And yeah, it was good. It was fiery. They were fully debating each other, and I liked it.
That was by far the best segment. Yeah, and the moderators allowed it to continue. I'm sure they had someone in their ear saying, keep this going, because they were finally really talking to each other face to face as to, their different perspectives. And so in a nutshell, Walz was reminding America of Trump's intransigence at the end of 2020, fundamental view that he hadn't lost the election, his role in facilitating the January the 6th riots, and very much positioning the vice president's role as a constitutional role to stand up to the president, like Pence did at the time, if it is clear and the courts have confirmed that the results were legitimate. And it was really telling for me that J.D. Vance didn't want to ask the question posed by Walz directly. Would he have done the same thing? Would he stand up against Trump? And I think Walz really prosecuted that exceptionally well. And, I thought it was quite striking. Whether America is awake at whatever the time is on the East Coast as this debate pushes in to the end. We shall see. But I thought that was very, very powerful from Wells.
Yeah, there's not much I can add to that, really. It was odd hearing Vance sort of admit that there is misinformation out there and that it's okay to let it circulate. And yeah, the fact that he wouldn't answer that direct question and then started talking about the future and censorship. And this, yeah, it was, you're right. Waltz nailed that one.
It's extraordinary, just quickly on the censorship, this fundamental tension in America between free speech and then the right to say anything, even if it's hateful, even if it's complete nonsense. And obviously his reference to Kamala Harris wanting to censor people during the COVID or post the sort of COVID time. I think for New Zealand listeners, reflect back to some of the internal debates we had in this country around, what was right, what was wrong at that time. And obviously, a very, very strong point of difference here between the two candidates. But I didn't think Vance got out of that with much glory.
No, he didn't. And I thought it was interesting that Waltz has mentioned a couple of times sort of like this revisionist history, because there is, sort of conspiracy theories out there now saying that January 6th was created by the FBI, that it didn't really happen, or that it was just, a group of sort of exuberant sightseers at the Capitol, and that the police sort of let them in and all this sort of stuff. And that's what Walls was referring to there. He has been also, though, still trailing off at the end of sentences and not quite making sense and not quite hitting the points he's trying to make quite succinctly enough, I don't think. But in terms of the substance of what he was saying, I think he won that section of the debate against Vance.
He gets the words mixed up, doesn't he? You get a sense of what he's trying to say and prosecute, certainly the issue he wants to prosecute, but then he'll get his the wrong word in the wrong place and sort of loses effect. But, maybe we're judging too fiercely. On to must be close to the final section.
So we've just heard the two closing statements by the two candidates. They weren't allowed to make opening statements, but they did make closing ones. Overall, in terms of how the debate went, I think Walls was better in terms of substantive policy discussions, but in terms of delivery and how he came across and connecting with the issues that I think are important to American voters, I think Vance did better in that respect. And overall, if I had to give a score, I think I would narrowly give it to Vance.
Yeah, I would too. You said right at the start of the debate that watch out for Minnesota nice, because sometimes it can be loaded with some pretty pointed passive-aggressive energy. Well, I didn't see a huge amount of energy from Walls. In fact, there were many times where when Vance was speaking and making his points, that he would sort of nod in agreement. So the optics, particularly in the split screen, didn't do him any favours. He looked older, he looked grumpier, and he just didn't seem to be, certainly wasn't as fluent in terms of either prosecuting the case or certainly in retorting. I thought there'd be a lot more retorting and back and forth. I mean, clearly there was a state of democracy in America segment, but largely, particularly in the middle bits, it was pretty flat. Both gave their 2 minutes. Both then would respond with a minute retort each, and they'd move on to the next section. I didn't think it moved the dial very much. I think one last point, and just really reinforcing it to me, Vance came across a heck of a lot more credible than I was expecting him to. I was expecting him to be this sort of hard right puppet full of rhetoric and hard slogans. I saw someone who at least gave the impression of being more considered and understanding of different perspectives than his own. And I thought that was all the more powerful for him coming across like that. I would give it to Vance as well. But in terms of those middle voters who would be sort of undecided, I'm not sure it moved the dial. And frankly, I think the hurricane that ripped through Georgia and North Carolina, two critical swing states with roads closed and buildings destroyed, I think that's going to have more of an impact in terms of the final Electoral College vote than these 90 minutes. But it was fascinating, and it was great to watch with my fellow American tragic.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's going to move the needle. I suspect a lot of people turned off halfway through when it started to get a little bit dull, and it was getting late, as you say, on the East Coast. And yeah, we didn't see any of the weirdness that Vance has become known for on display. He spoke very well. He was very coherent in terms of what he was saying. I'm unable to fact check all of the things that they were saying live, but I'm sure people will be doing that after the fact. But in terms of delivery, yep, I'm going to give it to Vance too.
Right. So Vance, a clear winner, but probably doesn't mean anything anyway, is the succinct summary of our 90 minutes together. So until our next episode in a few days' time, you would have picked up we're doing 2 a week now as we close in with 35 days to go from a very windy, blustery and rainy Tauranga, haere.
And from a cold and about to get extremely wet Oamaru and North Otago, mā te wā. What's the Story Old Glory is written, produced, edited and presented by Elizabeth Soul and Todd Muller for Old Glory Casting. Our cover art is by Caitlin at Studio Naylor. Our theme music is Shootout at Sundown by Del Boney. You can find us on all the usual social media channels at Old Glory Pod and send us your questions to oldglorypod@gmail.com.